Hi, I'm James, and before we start with this video, I'd just like to start by saying this is not an easy process. I have another video on the channel which I've had for a number of years replacing the keyboard on a MacBook Air 13-inch 2013 to 2017, and the number of people I get emailing me and asking me if I can fix theirs because they've watched the video and don't want to do it is really quite surprising. And this is a much more complicated procedure than even on the MacBook Air. So if you aren't sure what you're doing or you're just not confident with anything on this, I would recommend getting someone to do it professionally if possible, or going down the route of a palm rest assembly replacement with keyboard included. But with that said, we're going to flip over the machine and get started. So the first thing we're using is we have a 1.2mm pentalobe screwdriver, and we just need to go around with this and remove all the screws from the base of the laptop. As we remove these, we're going to put them off to the side in the order that they were removed, or in the same arrangement they were removed from. There are a lot of different screw sizes inside these machines, so having space to lay things out and keep track of what screws came from where is really critical, because you are going to have a lot of different components spread out and a lot of different screw sizes which all need to go back in their correct places. I would also just like to say, obviously, the keyboard for this system I picked up from Amazon. I've picked up a complete set with screws, backlight, and the keyboard itself. It is possible sometimes to transfer the backlights from keyboard to keyboard, but the cost difference in buying one with the backlight is pretty small, and it does just mean when you invariably tear the backlight when taking it out, you don't have to worry. I'm not even really going to make too much of an effort to avoid doing that because I have a replacement here. So with the screws removed, simply get in under here and remove the back panel like so. Our very first job after opening up the laptop is one of disconnecting the battery. So what we're going to do is peel this sticker out the way, and then we can simply put fingers each side of the battery connector and lift it up to disconnect. And the first thing I'm going to do on this is actually to remove the screen. So to go ahead and do this, first of all, I need a Torx T4 piece, and I'm going to remove these two screw covers. And the adhesive for that. And the same on the other side. Our next step then is we are going to get a sharp pry tool and just lift the connector. So the screen connector has this small latch, so we just need to pop that up and then use that to very carefully unplug the screen like so. The reason we're going to remove the screen first is simply it is one of the most expensive components on this machine, and just by you're going to have to take it off anyway to effect the repair, because you don't want to scratch it or anything like that when you are working on the machine. And just by doing it at the start, you minimise the risk of any damage to it while you're working. So we have unplugged those, unplugged the three Wi-Fi aerial connectors, and we also need to just disconnect this FaceTime connector, the camera connector. So push that up and then peel it out from along the top of the heatsink under that rubber. So we now take our Torx T4 bit, and we have these two small screws here, which have these little hinge covers. So we're going to remove each of these and place them to one side. And now we are going to swap to a Torx T9 bit and undo. So what I like to do is remove 2 on each side. So these 2 hold in this little cable holder for the Wi-Fi antenna, and then on the other side there are no cables held on that side. And what I'm going to do now is just quickly reposition the laptop. So what we have done is we have moved to the edge of the worktop, and I'm going to bring the laptop in. I'm going to open the screen up and place it so that it is overhanging the edge of the desk, and then undo the final 2 screws holding it in place. The reason we do this is it makes it easier to remove the panel. Basically you have to angle it out from the chassis because it kind of sits tucked inside, and if the screen is closed you can't get the correct angle on it. So with those removed, we can then lift the screen up and in and remove it like so. So now we return our Torx T4 bit to the screwdriver, and we have these 2 covers to remove. And with that done, we can then lift the covers out. And then we are going to pop off the cable that joins the logic board to this board over on the side here. This cable is then removed by just pressing in on the sides while gently pulling on the cable just to release that, like so. We also want to pop up the speaker cable, and we do this by just getting this pry tool underneath and lifting like so, and then just threading that out the way. And also we're going to remove the touchpad cable just by getting a finger in on the side and lifting that up and away from the main board. Next, we want to continue using the Torx T4 bit and remove 2 of the 3 screws that hold down the fan. And this screw on the end of the heatsink. We're not actually going to completely remove the fan or unplug it because we can just leave it attached to the main board. So it's easier if we just keep that in place and lift things out as a single unit. The power plug also needs to be disconnected. And to do that, we have a little tab in here which we can press down on. Then pressing in with the spudger on there, we are going to gently pull the cable out. While doing this, we can also disconnect this small keyboard backlight connector in the top corner. The other side speaker also needs to be disconnected. So again, we're going to just gently slide the spudger underneath and lift that like so. And then disconnect this other ribbon cable, which I believe is for the microphone, underneath that. Also necessary to disconnect the keyboard itself, so we are going to peel back this, use the tip of the pry tool to just lift that latch open and slide the cable out like so. With everything necessary now disconnected, we can work around the screws on the main board itself. And then, having double checked that we have disconnected everything that we need to, we can get the end of the heatsink and fan and lift those up and remove the main board. While we are definitely now making some progress, we still have some way until we have full unimpeded access to the keyboard. So we are going to remove the MagSafe connector, which is again held in with two Torx T4 screws. And lift that out like so. So now we need to remove the I/O board, and here we have another Torx T4 screw, and then a change of pace, we have a Torx T8. That is because this screw also has the heatsink screw into it, so it is actually a T8 with a thread then that goes inside it. And with that done, we can lift the I/O board out. And clear of the chassis. Then return to the Torx T4 bit and have three screws which hold in the speaker on this side. And the same on the other side as well. And so now on to the worst bit of working with these machines. And first of all, we're going to disconnect the touchpad cable by peeling up this sticker and then peeling off the cable. Because now we get the fun job of removing the battery, and this is glued into the chassis because Apple hate us. So to start, we have a single Torx T4 bit which we need to remove here, and then the fun job. So I'm going to use some isopropanol and I'm going to start spraying this in under the battery. What we are doing this for is to try and just break down some of the adhesive which holds these cells into the unibody. And then we will give it a minute to let it work through. This battery is obviously still good, so we're going to want to refit it at the end, so we don't want to damage it while taking it out, which makes it all the more fun to get this done. So with all that done, we now have just got to remove this plate over the touchpad. So again, more Torx T4 bits. Now, why Apple had to glue down the battery without using sort of the pull tabs you see on later devices, or just the plastic frame that you see in the MacBook Airs, I guess it was to maximise the volume of battery that you could get into it and allowing some expansion room, but God, I hate it. It's always such a nasty little bit of a job just getting out that battery pack without tearing anything, and it's always the worst part of working on these sort of 2013, 2014, 2015 MacBook Pros. But never mind, we are nearly at the keyboard. So with all those screws removed, we can then lift out the plate and we can finally get all the way around the keyboard backlight. So now we have access to the keyboard, and our first job is to get out the backlight. So we use a metal pry tool to get in to the backlight, and then we are just going to pull the backlight off the back of the keyboard. Now this is all pretty dusty and dirty in here. We need to pull the keyboard connector off it as well. So I'm just going to give this a quick clean out. And now we're going to add something to the keyboard, and that is duct tape. That's because basically when we pull the keyboard, we are going to be pinging out all of these little rivets that hold it in place. And I don't want them flying all over my office. So by putting tape over the back of the keyboard, that keeps them all from coming free as we remove the keyboard. This does make it a little harder to see what you're doing, but it is worth it for just saving general mess. So if that's done, let's work on getting the keyboard out. And so we are going to go in on one corner, and we are using our metal pry tool. And what we want to do is just find a spot where we can get in under the keyboard and pry up the first rivet. And having done that and unveiled one of them, we pinged out the first one. But from here we should then be able to begin to work our way around . So with a bit of persistence and pulling, we now have the keyboard out. Now, I think we can all agree this is pretty gross in here, so I'm going to clean up my desk from all the detritus that has fallen out of the keyboard and clean up the inside of the chassis before we continue. So now we have the keyboard out, we have cleaned this up, not perfectly, but better than before, and we have our new keyboard to go into place. Fortunately, most of the rivets pulled rather than just the tops popping. There are a few, and if you do want to, you can pull these with pliers or pop them out with a screwdriver. There are sufficient out on this that I am not too worried. I'm just going to screw in all the ones that have popped out. And now we get the fun job of we have all our tiny screws which we're going to put in to all the holes where the rivets came out. So I'm going to pop on a podcast while I do this, and you get to watch it in fast forward. So with that done, we can now take our backlight and put that into position. So there are a number of screw mounting points in the chassis, and we can use these to line the backlight up. So what we're going to do is peel the adhesive, remove the plastic backing, and starting at the top, get the backlight lined up over all these screws, making sure we don't trap the keyboard cable underneath. And then we can take our pry tool and begin pressing down the corners to stick it into position. Now we can pull flat the keyboard cable and slot into place the cover for the touchpad, which sits on top of that cable. We can then refit our Torx T4 bit and screw down the cover. For the moment, we are going to leave the speakers out and instead are going to move on to refitting the I/O board. Making sure these angle in beneath the edge of the chassis. Before refitting the two screws into the board. At the other end, we can then return the MagSafe connector. And now we are ready to reinsert the logic board. We want to make sure we do this without trapping the backlight connector, the keyboard connector, or the microphone and also the I/O board, and this can take a little bit of fiddling to get this in properly because we want to angle it high enough up that again these clips slot in inside the chassis, but keeping all of those connectors out from under the board. Next we are going to start refitting some of the connectors, some of the screws I should say, so fixing the heatsink and fan into position, making sure you have the correct length screws in each place because we have arranged these in the same shape that they came out from. And then refitting our screws to the main board, or logic board I should say. With that done, we can then begin to connect some of the cables back in. So starting with this one for the I/O board. Our new keyboard connector. The backlight connector. Power, and microphone. At this stage, we can now reunite our speakers with the machine. Again, remembering which screw went in which place, so I do this by putting the speakers alongside the screws in the arrangement they came out. So, right side speaker in first. Connected back in, and its cable pushed into place by the I/O board. You can put these in earlier, I just find it easier when they're not in the way for some of the other connectors. And then the left speaker, making sure this this cable tucks in under this little section here. Plugged back in by pressing in from the top. And again, 3 screws refitted. So now we want to refit our battery, and I've applied fresh 3M double-sided tape to the battery. And what we want to do is start by aligning the center section, and then positioning the outers, making sure that the last cell tucks in under the speaker. I like to put the speaker in first because it helps line things up. Obviously you don't have to tuck it under it, but it just means you're not going to be obstructing it either if it's already in position. And then we just want to adjust this so that the frame sits in place, and then fit the screw on the end here. So now we are really in the home stretch, so we want to get this connector in place to connect the I/O board to the logic board. So now we are really in the home stretch, so we want to get this connector in place to connect the I/O board to the logic board, and we also want to refit the touchpad cable, clicking it in at the top, and then probably should have started at the bottom actually. So slot it in at the bottom first, making sure it's pushed all the way in. And then fitting the connector at the top and pressing it down over the battery. We can then replace these two covers. And with that done, we are really just needing to reconnect the screen and test things before refitting the base. So refitting the screen, really the opposite of removal. So we are going to angle it in, slot into place, and then just fit one screw to each side of the hinge so that we can open and close it easily. Before pressing the Wi-Fi antenna holder into place and screwing it down, making sure the FaceTime cable is run alongside it. and fitting the screws to the other hinge. The little hinge cover pieces can also go back in now. The FaceTime camera cable can be routed through under this rubber and pushed into place, and the Wi-Fi antenna cables refitted. We can then reconnect the display panel connector. Making sure it is properly latched down. And we are now ready to reconnect the battery and test the machine, having one last thing, refitted those two rubberized screw covers. So, having checked it, all powers up perfectly, keyboard all seems to be working fine, and no issues found. Having run a diagnostic, everything passes okay. All that is left to do is refit the base. And thank you for watching if you've got all the way to the end. I would just like to say, hit the like button if this has helped you repair your machine or convinced you to take it somewhere to have it done. Hit the thanks button if you would like to make a contribution and support our channel. Subscribe if you would like to see more videos as we post them. And thank you for watching. Have a good day.